Hello, and welcome to Presenting, a podcast where we chat about various topics related to role playing games, typically Paizo products such as Pathfinder and Starfinder, but also others. I'm John Godek. With me today is Lysle Kapp. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. Glad to be here.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Good to have you. Good to see you here in person. This is a nice opportunity for me. So Lyle is an RPG freelance author whose numerous works include credits with Fantasy Flight Games, White Wolf Publishing, Dark Quest Games, Malhavoc Press, End Publishing, and several Pathfinder Society scenarios for Paizo. So, Lyle, can you talk a little bit about your journey to becoming a freelance RPG writer?
Yeah, sure. Um, well, I started out as a player, and
Yeah.
I guess that's probably where a lot of writers begin. And then I had actually, my wife had a job opportunity in California, and that seemed too good to be true, and in some ways it was. But she ended up going out early, and I had a lot of time on my hands, and so it was the height of the big D20 boom, and I was looking online and found a lot of open calls, and just started submitting and writing, and some of those got accepted, and then I had writing samples I could take to other places, and then most of my work was for Fantasy Flight Games, and I got
Hmm.
in some regular their bestiaries and some of their other work, including Dragon Star.
Hmm.
Remember that way back. Um, And then, unfortunately, or fortunately for me, my law career took off in California. And so I kind of put writing on hold for a while. And then, when circumstances brought me back to my hometown here outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to care for family, I found I had a little bit more time, and I submitted to the open call for Paizo's quests back when they had
Hmm.
quests. And then heard nothing for about 2 years. And then out of the blue, I got an email saying, "Hey, would you like to write for us?" And I did. And so my first quest was 1016 collection
Hmm.
for first
Right.
edition, and the rest has sort of been history, I guess. Writing for Paizo every season since.
Yeah, I noticed that. So you did season 10 for first edition, and then you had like roughly every year you picked up another scenario out of that. Have you worked on any hardcovers in addition or just the adventures?
I have not worked on any
Yeah.
hardcovers, so if anyone's listening is looking for, no, my last hardcovers were back in the D20 boom. Um,
Mhm.
but I really enjoy storytelling, and so I'm drawn to the scenarios. Um, but maybe I'll try my hand at the long form if I get the opportunity.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, your story is quite a bit different than a lot of folks I've interviewed. A lot of them have met people at conventions and things like that. Yours is probably more akin to like even like Owen Casey Stevens, where he just talks about sending things into Dragon magazine
yeah,
and hoping to get stuff published. So a lot more old school approach compared to what the networking that people do now, I think.
yeah, I guess I am a bit more old school in general. Um,
Mhm.
but
Now,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, out in Pittsburgh now, uh, you're a player, but you're also running games out there as well.
I am not so much, the last few years, but yes,
Hmm.
our local community is pretty strong, and in fact, I'm doing a face to face convention here in 2 weeks. I'll be running the Secluded Siege at
Nice.
CosCon in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So, if any of your listeners are that way, there's still some open seats.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. So now you're a practicing attorney, and I think you said something about having to give briefs in California, even though you're in Pittsburgh when we were corresponding.
Yes,
Are you working? Are you doing remote work then for law?
I am. So I initially passed the Pennsylvania bar, and that was
Hmm.
one of the reasons why I had a lot of free time when I eventually moved to California because I take the bar
Right.
there. Uh, and yeah, my firm's located in Emeryville, California, and I do work uh, for them still, and I do it all remote. Most of my work is writing briefs and conducting discovery. A lot of
Hmm.
depositions nowadays are even taken by phone or Zoom,
Right.
so I
Right.
do that as well.
So, what type of law do you practice, if I can ask?
Sure. Um, Most of my cases have been product defect litigation or in the
Oh,
area of toxic
right.
torts. Um,
Wow.
but litigation is I guess sort of the
Right.
broad umbrella. So I
Right.
do
Right.
focus pretty much on the pretrial. So everything from
Hmm.
responsive pleadings to summary judgment motions, discovery, and everything in between. Trying the cases are for generally for the more seasoned attorneys. So,
Right. 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 So you're kind of doing all the legwork ahead of time, so they have the information to go into court and do all the big show. Then I guess.
exactly. Yeah, and if I'm successful, then we don't necessarily get to a courtroom, so we can resolve the case outside.
Right. Right. So, how in terms of the product liability tort litigation type of things that you're doing, what extent of those actually get settled before going to trial? I'm kind of curious.
Well, that's a good question. I don't have statistics. I would say the
Yeah.
vast majority. Certainly
Yeah.
the cases that I handle. But you always
Yeah.
have to be prepared to go to trial, and in some
Right.
cases, you can't get a case to move along until you're prepared for that. So with COVID, the court systems were shut down for a while, so now there's
Right.
quite a backlog. So um, that's resulted in some resolution of cases too, just out of necessity.
Hmm. Hmm. So, in terms of like writing legal briefs, right,
Mhm.
versus doing freelance writing, which do you find more challenging?
Challenging. Well, I guess it depends. Deadlines and word count or page limits are are the bane for both.
Yeah.
Um, in many ways, they're pretty similar because you're telling a story and you're trying to pick out the salient points, whether it's to relate to a precedent or um for a certain encounter or game system to move the plot along. So my wife would probably tell you that both are pretty challenging because when I'm up against a deadline, I become a bit of a bear. Uh, Writer's block is an issue for both. I'm an idea guy,
Yeah.
so I can see things in my head, but sometimes just getting it down on paper or on a hard drive, I guess nowadays is it can be difficult.
Now, I imagine you have to do quite a bit of research for the legal briefs,
Mhm.
similar to when you're freelance writing, you're doing quite a bit of research as well. Do you Is the research harder to do for legal briefs? Do you have to really dig deeper, or are you just looking at like prior case law type of thing?
It depends on the case. If it's an area of law that I'm more familiar with, I'll still make sure that my precedents or the cases that I
Hmm.
cite are up to date and that there hasn't been any recent developments. But otherwise, I have a pretty good grasp, I think, of the law. And also, same with the games. If it's the type of encounter that I've played before or that I've run, then it comes pretty easily. But if it becomes something more a bit esoteric, um,
Right.
but those are also the more fun, both for law and for writing,
Hmm.
to explore something that you haven't done before and just see what it produces.
So I have two related questions here, and the first one is going to be: has some part of your legal career enabled you to flesh out something more in the scenarios that you write, or the adventures you've written, or even prior to that, some of the other things that you've written for other publishers?
Um, well, I haven't written any cases involving trial. I have dabbled with bureaucracy and the burden of
Yeah,
envy, and maybe
yeah,
that's why I focused on the bureaucrat character in that one quite a bit. And
yeah,
maybe I do slip a little more legal lore skill challenges in than maybe some of my fellow authors.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but to be honest, the Yeah, if if you do something, do it right, I'd probably lose the audience, or in this case, the players. If I included all the loopholes and things that I find fascinating, but uh,
Yeah,
that the casual player probably doesn't. So
yeah,
in both, you stick to the big concepts and only get into the minutia when you need to.
right. Well, I have a good friend who's also a lawyer and a game designer. His name's Ron Lundeen. You
Hmm.
might have heard of him.
Sure.
I don't know. Um, so one of the things that he's done, and we actually played through the adventure where this thing came out, and I had forgotten about it because he told me about it like a couple years ago. He wrote a contract that a a devil had been bound to do some sort of work, and so it was bound with a contract. And until he got the contract, he didn't know that the devil didn't know the terms of his release. And he put really kind of funny minutia in there about, the length of the contract and things that could void it and all this kind of stuff. And so I thought, now I think he did a lot more contract law, so maybe he's more familiar with that part. But I thought that was kind of a real clever way to kind of bring a legal aspect into the role playing game. So
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. I Back in
yeah,
my college days when I had more time, I had PCs that would write manifestos
yeah,
and would come up
yeah,
with different contracts and oaths and things,
yeah.
um, that are probably too lengthy for the adventures that I've been writing lately.
Yes, yeah, the word count issues. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
true.
Exactly.
I think he got away with this as it was actually a graphic that had words, so it didn't even
Ah,
count, for the word count. So,
never thought of
uh,
that. So, it,
now my related question though is the reverse of this. Has any of your RPG writing come in to your legal briefs and helped you on the law side of things?
hmm.
That's a tricky question here, I know, but
That is a bit of a tricky question. Uh, I can't think of a specific instance. Uh, but again, maybe in law in general, uh, one of the things I need to do is anticipate what objections or
Mhm,
arguments a judge may have or opposing counsel, um, and also come up with questions for discovery that I want a witness
right,
to answer. So, in a sense, I'm playing a role
yeah,
of the witness or the judge or opposing counsel, and so
mhm,
the experience in role playing allows me to sort of take on the mindset of another, maybe even an alien mindset in some instances. But
yeah,
it allows me to, I think, better anticipate. Well, what might a player want to do here, or what might a particular character do here, or uh, for
right,
law, then it would be, what's this witness going to say? What objection are they going to have that I need to anticipate in perhaps in my
mhm.
papers, or at least have a response for?
Yeah, you can draft some sample dialogue that you expect them to say, maybe? I don't know.
Yes,
I
well,
guess that would
right.
be good.
Anticipate what cases what
Yeah,
precedents they
okay.
might want
Yes,
to
yes.
mention, and then
Yeah,
explain how the facts of my case differ.
right,
Um,
right,
I guess we call that the twist in a
right.
scenario where things are
Yeah,
not quite the way that you think they are initially.
yeah. So, it sounds to me like you kinda keep your legal and your freelance work really separated just from the discussion here. Do the people that you practice law with know that you're a freelance game writer and designer like that?
I think most do,
Yeah,
and in fact, for some of my fellow attorneys, although I don't work out of the office anymore, uh,
right.
uh, play role playing games or had children
Yeah,
who played. Uh, and in law school again,
yeah.
other players. So there's role players everywhere. I don't hide the fact, but I don't necessarily put it under my bar number on the
Yeah, yeah,
pleadings.
yeah. I always kind of wonder that in a professional setting, what people think about it, especially for it's taken a long time for role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, the main one, to go mainstream and be
Yeah.
generally acceptable. And for myself, I'm a university professor, and it was just like when I started doing more freelance writing and going to national conventions and things, I started talking it up and saying what I've been doing. Basically, I'm volunteering for organized play and helping people have fun, and they seem to appreciate that. I don't know if they all understand what it is, but it doesn't have the same kind of negative stigma on it that I think it might have had when I was a kid growing up early on. And you know, my first jobs were in the late '80s, and I that's not something I would have been talking about then, probably.
Yeah. Well, I guess I've kind of always worn some things on my sleeve. My wife still makes fun of me that I wore a Batman watch to an interview,
Yeah,
so I've never
yeah,
really hidden my interests, and I've done all right, even in the legal field.
yeah,
So just be true to yourself. I try to do that,
yeah,
and so far, so good.
yeah.
Worked out pretty well.
So, what advice do you have for people interested in becoming a freelancer now? That there aren't so many open calls, but there are some,
Hmm.
but who are trying to break in, say, with a company like Paizo.
Well, I think things have changed quite a bit. That those opportunities that were there uh, aren't necessarily there as far as companies actively seeking open calls, but there are, as you mentioned, some from time to time. I think my advice would be the barriers now to self publishing seem to be reduced so
Hmm.
much that an opportunity to get your work out there on a blog or a website, um, or maybe through the Infinite,
Right.
um, Pathfinder Infinite or Starfinder Infinite, or some of the other platforms that are out there. I think you can really take advantage of that. Um,
Hmm.
and so I guess that would be my suggestions, and certainly get to know your fellow players and GMs, and online has been great for that. I've gotten to play with people from across the world that
Hmm. Hmm.
just provide new insights and thoughts, and they're just plain fun. So I
Yeah.
really enjoy that. And so play. That would be my advice. Play and write.
Now, would you advise somebody who's thinking about a career that to get into law? And if you did, what are some lessons you learned in terms of that maybe you wish you would have done things a little bit different, or how to study, prepare for the LSAT, pass the bar, what type of field to go into? Kind of what advice do you have for people interested in getting into law?
Well, the advice I always got was just don't do it. And
Yeah,
they said, look, the hours are
yeah,
long, the
yeah,
stress is pretty high, the demands
yeah,
are great, and at the end of the day, the pay is just not as much as you think it is when you work out all the hours. And
yeah.
a lot of that has been true. Um, but my advice is, if you're thinking about getting into law, don't do it unless you really love it. And
Hmm.
I think that's also true for freelancing,
Yeah.
and pretty much anything else you do. That uh, if you really enjoy it and you get satisfaction out of it, then those long hours, the pay, the stress, you can handle it a lot better. It's times it's still a grind, and
Hmm.
even freelancing, as much as I love to play and write at times, it's a job. When you have an
Hmm.
assignment due and you just got to sit down and put words on paper.
Hmm.
Same with legal writing. So if you don't love it, it's a lot harder to do. So my
Right.
advice is do
Yeah.
what you love.
Yeah. That's kind of. I'm glad to hear that. Actually, my aunt had told me when I was going to grad school for business. So I have a doctorate in business, and she was saying, "Oh, you should have gone to law school instead. It pays a lot better." And my uncle is he's a very prominent litigator actually down in Miami, and I have several cousins and other relatives all kind of work for his firm. So it's his firm that he owns down there. And I thought about it, but like what you're saying, as an academic, I have a really pretty cushy lifestyle here. I don't put in a lot of hours, and I'm willing to make that trade off for having that free time and not getting a tremendous amount of pay. That's the one thing. I took a lot of pre law classes, so I'd taken quite a few pre law classes and had really seriously thought about it. But then talking to lawyers and kind of as you suggest, a lot of hours you got to put in for that pay, a lot of stress, and that's one thing I enjoy about my life now is I don't I don't have a lot of stress. So
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I don't have a lot of stress. I do have 3
yeah.
kids, in a
Yes.
pandemic.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but, fortunately, I've been successful enough at,
Yeah.
what I do and, been doing it long enough that,
Yeah.
I can sort of pick my hours
Right.
and projects, and
Nice.
so I put in the time,
Yes.
over the years, but now I'm reaping the rewards, so nice.
Excellent. Excellent. So, you're working on any cool projects that you can talk to us about here?
I c I can't, mention any projects that I'm currently working on,
Okay.
but, I guess one cool thing, mentioning my kids is, uh, at the beginning of the year, they came home and talked about clubs, and,
Yeah.
they all came home and said, "Dad, we signed up the 2 oldest, we signed up for a D&D club." I'm like, "Wow, I didn't even know there
Wow.
was a D&D
Yeah.
club." And, and here, as a father, I'd always, wanted them to play and had
Right.
taken them to some places, but they're always like, "Oh, 4 hours, who can sit down and do anything
Right.
for that long?" And all this
Yeah.
math and things. So I tried not to get too excited,
Hmm.
when I heard that, but, um, I contacted then they told me the news was there were so many people had signed up that they couldn't offer the club year round. And so,
Wow.
this is where Daddy Bear stepped in and said, "I'm going to, talk to the school," and I did, and I talked to the teacher there and found out what they needed and, told them that I had some experience and I had the time and the interest, and so they started doing it after school. So,
Yeah.
I've been volunteering there, from time to time to help out, after school and help get the club going, and so, that's been one of the things I've been working on, within the past year. Pretty excited about.
No,
It's
that
just
that's
fun.
cool. And do your kids actually play in your games, or they want to play with some other DM?
No, they play with their own friend. Well, my daughter
Yeah.
actually is an excellent, dungeon master,
Yeah.
and I'll be running a table, and then I'll hear, laughter or cheers
Yeah.
from her table a couple away, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Wow, I hope to be as good as her someday." So,
No, I think you're very fortunate. My neither of my kids would really get into playing role playing games until after they graduated, from high school and then got into college. And now my oldest plays all the time, but she
mm.
won't play in any of my games still. So it's like it's not cool when Dad does it. I'll do it with my friends, So, uh, well, Lyle, it's been very, very fun having a chance to talk with you and get to know you. Thanks again so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.